What is sciatica? Hey everybody, this is Mike Erlob with another episode of Power Your Life. So, many of us have had a episode of sciatica, or you know somebody that has. It's a common term. You hear it thrown around all the time. My sciatica is acting up. But if you've ever had an experience or ever experienced sciatica, you will never forget it. It can be one of the most unrelenting back issues around. And I'm speaking from experience because of about 4 years ago, I had a bout of sciatica and it was miserable. It's this pain, literally a pain in your butt. And it's such a deep, seated pain. And for me, it was in my left buttock and cheek, and it went all the way down into my left ankle. And it's so hard to describe because it was like this really deep-seated pain with a tingling that shot down my leg. But that tingling, it was constant, and there was nothing I could do to get rid of that pain. Like, there was no stretch, no position. A lot of times when your back hurts, you can stand up if you're sitting down, and that helps. Or if you're standing up, or walking, you can sit down, or you can kneel, or you can squat, or you can take one knee. Usually for most of us, there's a position that you can get into that at least alleviates and takes pressure off of the back, and then helps us subside some of that pain. But if you've ever had sciatica, I'm here to tell you, there's nothing that can get rid of that pain. There's no position. Even medication wasn't working. What happened with me was, we went on a trip to Arizona and we drove the entire way. And me being kind of the stubborn guy that I am, refused to give up the driving. My wife wanted to take over, and we should have taken shifts, and that would have probably kept me from having this issue. But I insisted on driving all the time, and we just kept pushing it through. And being in the truck driving like that, by the time I got down there I was visiting my brother in Tucson. By the time I got down there, it was just this pain, and it just made me miserable, and it just wouldn't go away. I tried laying down on my back, putting my legs up. I tried laying on my stomach. I tried stretching, pulling my leg over and stretching the hip out. You guys have probably seen people do that. I tried laying down and putting my one ankle on top of my knee into that figure four and kind of pulling that, trying to stretch the hip out, taking anti-inflammatories, hitting ibuprofen and Aleve and Tylenol and putting ice and heat. Trying all of those things while I was at my brother's to get that pain to go away. And it just would not let up. It kept me up. I couldn't sleep. It was just absolutely miserable. And the thing is, though, is even though you're miserable and it was very painful, you could still get up and somewhat function and do things, but it just was this constant pain that never went away. And if you've ever experienced or know somebody who's been around that, they get a little grouchy. You get a little irritable, and they're not a lot of fun to be around until you can figure out how to alleviate that. And for some people, it takes a very long time to get rid of that pain. So what exactly is going on when you have sciatica? What is the true issue? What is happening? Well, to understand that, what you need to know is you need to understand a little bit about what the sciatic nerve is. And we're going to take our little spine model here. And the sciatic nerve is the largest nerve in the body, okay? So it is a combination of several nerve roots that are coming off of the spine, and these are the nerve roots right here. So they're coming off the spinal cord, they exit between the vertebrae, they come together and they join and make the larger nerve, the sciatic nerve, and then that travels down, and this is your backside. So that travels down through the buttock, and then it goes around the hip and down the back of the leg. So if we look at our other skeleton, our other Billy Bob, That sciatic, so you can see where the nerve roots are coming off, but that sciatic nerve, as we just was showing you, comes off of here and then travels down the back of the hip, and there's a whole bunch of muscles here. You know, we're going to talk about that here in a minute, but it goes through all those muscles, and then it travels down the back of your leg, and it divides out and innervates the muscles and the skin, and then it continues down around through the lower part of the leg and down into the foot. So it's that very large, and because it is such a large nerve, and it's the longest nerve and the largest nerve, it's susceptible to getting pinched anywhere along its path. And what that nerve does is, like all other nerves, is it carries the signals from the spinal cord to the legs. So it's what gives you the sensation, it what tells the muscles to work. I mean, it carries all that information. And like I said, it'll get pinched along the way. And think of this like a garden hose. You know, a nerve, when that garden hose is all the way open and you've got the faucet turned on, the water's running through the hose. Okay, so that's like the spinal cord, the brain sending the signals through the spinal cord and through the nerve and then down into the muscle and the skin, okay? So it's like that water flowing through the garden hose. Now, imagine you kink that garden hose. We've all had that happen, you know, where you're watering your yard or you're washing the car and everything's going along, and all of a sudden the water cuts off and you can't figure it out, and then you look back and you say, oh, well, the garden hose is kinked. Okay, that's basically what happens. That's a good analogy, you know. That water starts, or at least the trickle slows down. You know, there's not as much of that water coming out, and that's what happens when the nerve gets kinked or pinched. And it can get pinched from like a herniated disc. We've talked about that in the past. It can get pinched from the muscles around it, from changes in the position of the pelvis or the hips. Which put that nerve on a tension, and that nerve has to have slack, okay? So you think of the nerve like string too. So if you're gonna be able, so the nerve is attached here and it's running down, if you're gonna lift your leg up, all right, you have to have movement of that nerve. It has to have slack in it. And when it gets pinched, it gets really irritated, and then it tightens up. The nerve itself will swell up and it'll tighten up. And so then when you go to lift your leg up, you can't move it as far because it's tugging and pulling too much on there because it's lost its mobility. We call that the neural mobility. So, and that's in essence what happens with sciatica. It gets pinched and it becomes irritated, and we lose the mobility of that nerve to be able to glide and move with the body. So now, you know, we have to ask ourselves the question, okay, if that's what is sciatica, that's great. But why does that happen? And that nerve, it gets pinched because of the imbalances that are within your body that have been created by too much sitting, too many repetitive movements, different job tasks, or even past injuries. One of the ways you can get sciatica, and we see this a lot of times in the wintertime, is where somebody slips and falls and they land right on their rear end. You know, they land right on the buttock and they end up with a big bruise on their butt, and then that contusion causes swelling in the nerve. It makes all the muscles around that really tighten up. Now, that's one of the ways it can happen. It's not really the most common. The most common is from these imbalances that I've been talking about. And these imbalances are tight hip flexors. So we've talked about this before. So we've got Billy Bob right here. And remember that psoas muscle, that PSOAS, the psoas muscle. Remember that term because that muscle is the key to the spine and to the lower back. But that muscle comes right off of the spine, and then it comes through and joins up the iliacus, which lines inside the pelvis here. It comes down and attaches right there to the femur. And so remember, that muscle contracts, it allows you to lift the leg up. And however, when it gets tight, it creates other problems. So the tight hip flexors are psoas muscle. Weak glutes, okay? So a weak buttock muscles, gluteal atrophy, disappearing butt syndrome. All of those things are indicative that there's a problem with the back, or someone who just maybe has back issues, but they definitely goes hand in hand with sciatica. Tight hips, okay? Meaning that they can't lift the leg up as far, they can't rotate it. Many times I see this where somebody can't sit in that figure four. So like if you're sitting in the chair and you can't put your foot on top of the knee because they've lost that ability to rotate to the outside. So the femur's rotating out. We call that external rotation. So you can think of it as, and you can test this yourself, can you put your foot on top of your knee? Can you sit in a figure 4 position? If you can't do that, your hips are too tight and you're losing the mobility. Then the other imbalance is the abdominal muscles, the lower half, the muscles that are below the belly button, muscles that include the internal external obliques, the transversus abdominis, these lower abdominals, because these attach to your pelvis, and when they're strong enough, they help keep your pelvis in a good position. We're going to talk about that here in a minute. So what happened to me when I went to Arizona and I was on that trip was I was sitting in a position in the truck where I was sitting for hours, for hours. So we made that trip on the way down there in 2 days. And, so it's like 2 12-hour days of nonstop driving that I wasn't used to doing. And so when I'm sitting, and you're sitting in a vehicle like that, or you're sitting at work, or you're sitting at home, or you're watching too much TV, the psoas muscle gets shortened. Okay, so use your imagination, but your psoas muscle comes off here, and here is where it's in its longer position. But when that femur comes up, those legs come up, the muscle gets shorter. It draws up. And so what happened is that then when you go to stand up or you go to move is your psoas muscle, it goes into a spasm. And that creates compression or pull on the lumbar spine. But the other thing that does is that also causes the pelvis to tip forward. So I'll show you on the other spine. So that psoas, okay, because that hip flexor is coming off here, it actually tips, if you can see from the side, it'll tip the pelvis forward. Okay, so we call that an anterior pelvic tilt, but you just think of it as your pelvis tipping forward. All right, so that pelvis tipping forward combined with the compression of the lumbar spine is setting you up in a position where things are not going to be good. Then the next thing that happens is when that pelvis gets tipped forward, because of the alignment of the hip joint, it creates a position where the femur starts to get a little rotated to the inside. We call that internal rotation. So the hips become rotated due to that tipped pelvis. Then what happens is on this back side, okay, you have your buttock muscles, you have your gluteal muscles, but inside there's this little tiny muscle that's called the piriformis. And the piriformis, it's a muscle that is underneath the glute muscles, and it runs from the femur and it comes across. Now the reason that muscle is important is because as the sciatic nerve's coming down, it goes either under that muscle, over that muscle, or right through that muscle. It really varies from person to person. But because of that relationship of the piriformis to the sciatic nerve, when the femur gets rotated in because the pelvis is tipped forward, it puts that piriformis muscle on a bit of a stretch. Now the muscles don't like that. They don't like to be stretched out, especially that one in particular. So then what happens is, guess what it does? It gets mad and it starts to tighten up. And then when it starts to tighten up, guess what it pinches? It will pinch the sciatic nerve. Now you're going to start getting pain going down the leg, create irritation, inflammation in that area. But if this is left like this for too long, where you have a tipped pelvis, compressed spine, the hip gets rotated a little bit to the inside, the piriformis gets spasmed, but then your gluteal muscles start to get weak. Okay? And those gluteal muscles occur and they get weak because of a process that we call reciprocal inhibition. And basically what that means is that your muscle in the front, your hip flexor, okay, it actually shuts off that gluteal muscle. So it shuts that muscle off, which makes it get even weaker. And then that means that your hip flexor, your psoas muscle, can overpower that. It can even tip the pelvis more. And then the last thing that happens, if this is left unchecked and not fixed, is those lower abdominals, because of that tipping forward, and they attach right here to the front of the pelvis, it gets stretched out. So your lower abdominals get stretched out. And you've probably seen people like that where you look at them from the side and they've got their hips are kind of tipped forward and they've got a little bit of that protruding belly because their lower abdominals aren't strong enough to hold everything up in neutral, and they start to get stretched out. So all of these combined contribute to sciatica. okay? And you've got to fix all of those things. You can't just, a common mistake, I see this time and time again, a common mistake that folks make when they come in to see me with sciatica is all they've been doing is trying to stretch out that piriformis. You know, so many people, they'll get on a golf ball or a racquetball or a foam roller, and they'll try and massage that out. And they'll be sitting there, and they'll just be sitting in that figure 4 position, pulling the knee up, trying to stretch that out. Like, I don't know if you can see me as I sit here, but, you know, a lot of times, can you see me there, Arena? Yeah. A lot of times they sit, you know, people, and I did this too, you know, you sit in this position, and they're just pulling up on that knee, you know, to try and stretch that out. And it might, you know, might kind of feel good for a little bit, and then they're massaging that hip, but then, you know, they don't fix those other areas, and it just tightens and goes right back up into a spasm. And that, you know, you can't just stretch the hip and not correct the issue with the hip flexors, the psoas, and the lower abdominals, okay? You know, you can't just inject the hip. You can't just take pills and decrease the inflammation, because the problem with that sciatic nerve is it's mechanical. It's being pinched and compressed, and it's being pinched and compressed because the entire pelvis and lumbar and lower spine is out of position because of the psoas. It all starts from that psoas muscle. You're going to hear that from me again and again and again. It all comes from that. That's why I say that muscle is the key to everything else, because if you can't get that muscle to unlock, you can't get the hypertonicity in it to shut down, then you just continue to have the same problems over and over again, because it keeps that pelvis tipped forward, it keeps the hip rotated to the inside, and it makes that piriformis continue to spasm. So you can stretch that piriformis till you're blue in the face for as long as you want. If you don't fix that psoas, you're not going to be able to fix your sciatica. And good news is these things can all be corrected, okay? There is hope. You know, I know that for many of you, many times, because I felt this way too, that when you're in that kind of unrelenting pain, man, you just want out of it. I mean, it just hurts. You're just willing. You'll do anything to get rid of that pain. You know, what I had to do was I had to seek out somebody when I was there in Tucson to actually work on my hip flexor, to actually get in there and release my psoas muscle. That was the only way I was able to actually get relief and then actually use my own, you know, knowledge to be able to strengthen and work on those other areas. But, you know, next time I take a trip, I can guarantee you I'm going to listen to my wife. I can guarantee you. And if Shauna's watching this, and hopefully she is, I guarantee you, honey, I will listen to you. I will let you drive. I will not be stubborn because I don't want sciatica ever again. So, you know, my advice to you, if you're suffering from this, you know, take the time, work on each of those areas. Work on your psoas, work on your hips, work on the glutes, work on your lower abdominals. Okay, it's extremely important. If you would like to know more, I do have a new ebook out. It's called The 5 Best Kept Secrets to Fast Back Pain Relief. And you can get your free copy just by sending me a Facebook message. And just say, hey, Mike, send me the free back report. Okay, or just email me at mike@flex-pt.com, and we'll shoot you your free copy. I guarantee you it's going to help you. I really would like to leave you with this amazing quote that I came across from Andy Stanley. He's a pastor and author. And his quote, it really got me thinking. And he said that it is when our hearts are stirred that we become most aware of what they contain. It is when our hearts are stirred that we become most aware of what they contain. I'll let you chew on that one for a while, but until next time, power your life and keep moving forward.